From stories involving creatures, ghosts, and just the plain bizarre and unusual, tonight I will be sharing 8 stories covering various different topics. Thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. Stories can either be submitted at my subreddit r/slumberreads or my email that can be found in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Stay safe out there. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I weave through the trees, the ground soft and damp beneath my bare feet. I keep my eyes ahead, my gaze unwavering. It's night and the moon shines slightly through the treetops, giving me just enough light to navigate. I'm not sure why I'm out here, come to think of it. I realize that I'm not even sure how I got here. It's as if I'm being drawn into the forest, some unseen force pulling me. My pulse quickens at this sudden realization, and I snap out of my dazed trance and stop dead in my tracks. I hug myself, shivering, and look around cautiously. Not a single sound throughout the forest can be heard. It is dead silent, and I'm suddenly overcome with a sense of unease. Something isn't right. It's too quiet. A twig snaps from somewhere behind me and I whip around, staring off into the dark and straining to see anything more than 5 feet in front of me. A rustling of leaves off to my right. I jerk my head in that direction. "Who's there?" I call out, trying my best to sound intimidating. Suddenly, a scream rings throughout the forest. "Help! Somebody help me!" That voice. I know that voice. "Amara?" I scream. I start running, searching desperately for my best friend. "Amara, where are you?" I call out, searching for a sign of movement amongst the trees. Another scream rings out, but this time it seems to be coming all around, and I can't pinpoint the direction. The sound is unnaturally tense, and a sharp pain shoots through both of my temples. My vision becomes blurry and I drop to my knees, covering my ears. There is a ringing in my ears that lasts for a few moments before the sound stops just as suddenly as it came. My heart is racing. What the hell is going on? I look up, and I'm startled to see Amara standing in front of me. She looks down at me with a blank expression, saying nothing. "Amara, are you okay?" I ask. Her gaze moves from me to somewhere behind me. Her eyes widen with fear and all the color drains from her face. "He's here," she says, taking a step back. "What? Who's here?" I stand up and turn around. Between the trees, I see the faint outline of a person, tall and lanky, slowly moving toward us. "Who are you?" I call out, taking a step back in the process. The figure continues to move closer. "Amara?" I glance back at her, but her expression has become blank again. I reach out and shake her by the shoulders. "Amara, what's going on? Who is that?" I shake her a little harder, but it's no use. It's as if she's stuck in a sort of trance. I turn back around, and the figure is no more than 10 feet away now. It steps into a small patch of moonlight gleaming through the treetops. At first, it looks like a person. My blood runs cold at the sight. It's unnaturally tall, with limbs to match the height of its body. Its skin is pale, like a dead body. Where a face should be, there is none. Just a blank area where facial features should be. It continues to creep towards us, and I am completely frozen in fear. I see other shapes outside of my peripheral vision. Black outlines that look like people. I look around, and to my horror realize they are coming from all directions. I'm trapped. People from all sides surround me, their skin pale and their eyes expressionless. "It's too late for me, Katie." Amara's voice is just above a whisper. "Don't let him get you too," she says. The people are closing in and there is nowhere for me to run. I scramble, turning this way and that, trying to find a way to escape. They all reach their arms out, continuing to surround me, closing in on me like a pack of wolves isolating a deer. "Go into the forest," they all chant in unison, repeating it over and over. My eyes well up with tears, and I cover my ears, dropping to my knees again and closing my eyes shut. Even with my ears covered, there is no escape from their chanting. I jolt upright, panting and covered in sweat. At first I don't know where I am and it takes me a moment to realize I'm in my room. I sigh, running my fingers through my sweat-drenched hair and try to catch my breath. It was just a dream, I say to myself. Just a dream. The very same dream that has been plaguing me for the last 2 weeks, since my friend went missing on a camping trip. I lay back and close my eyes, trying to calm myself. I begin to relax, turning onto my side. I've almost fallen back asleep when I feel a cool breeze against my still damp skin. I open my eyes for a second, and I look out my bedroom window. It's open, and I don't recall leaving it like that before I went to bed. You probably did leave it open. You just forgot to close it before you went to bed. I reason with myself and shrug it off, closing my eyes and giving way to sleep once more. It happened on Sunday night. I was taking the 11:47 p.m. Amtrak from Washington, D.C. to NYC after visiting my boyfriend. As we pulled up to the Aberdeen stop, I saw him, a man standing outside on the platform. He stood with his back to the train, under the shadow of the station's awning, tall, well-built. Despite the muggy July heat, he wore a long trench coat and a hat, standing perfectly still. He stuck out like a sore thumb against the passengers hurrying off the train. Weird. I'd taken this train back from errands many times before, and rarely saw anyone get on this late, especially at a tiny stop like Aberdeen. As the doors whooshed open, I waited for him to board, but he didn't. He didn't even turn around. What's he doing out there, if not boarding? Waiting for another train, maybe. With a clank, the train started back up again. I shrugged and turned up the volume on my journey playlist. Lights flashed across the windows as we picked up speed. In the distance, the twinkling lights of a town. A highway, with pairs of headlights rolling past, a colossal antenna, flashing red at the top. The grays and blacks of the ground smudged into a blur, melted into the purple sky. My eyes fluttered closed. Now arriving in Wilmington, Delaware. The conductor's voice from the overhead speakers jolted me awake. I stretched, popped my earbuds out, and looked around. The train car was empty. Now the 2 girls who'd been sitting near the back were gone. Yawning, I turned to the window. My blood ran cold. There he was, the man in the trench coat again, standing on the platform, several feet away from the train. I gripped the armrests, my heart pounding. No, there's no way. The Amtrak goes faster than a car. How could he get there so fast? And why? Why would he be standing at the next stop when he didn't get on board? The doors whooshed open. I stared at him, face pressed against the window, watching for movement, but he didn't move. He just stood there, in the shadows, back to the train. But he was closer than last time. I could see the nape of his neck, and the shadow of dark hair that poked out from under his hat. His black dress shoes, shining in the light. Clack. I jumped, but it was only the doors clanking shut. The train rumbled underneath me, and then we were pulling away. The man in the station replaced with open fields of grass. I pulled out my phone. I just saw the same guy at 2 different train stops, Aberdeen and Wilmington. I wrote, my fingers flying across the keys. It's really weird. The 3 dots appeared, then Aaron replied, What? The same guy at both? Like he drove there as the train did? Yeah. My thumbs hesitated over the keys, wondering if I should tell her how strange he was too. The trench coat, the hat, always facing away. Probably just some weirdo. I typed instead and hit send. You should have Becca meet you when you get to NYC, Aaron texted back. And call me when you're safe back home, okay? That time, I didn't go to sleep. I stayed wide awake until we hit Philadelphia. As we pulled into the station, as I saw the myriad of street lamps twinkling in the darkness, I felt waves of relief. What is it about seeing civilization, crowds, cities that assuages our fear? It's like we're programmed to believe that nothing bad can ever happen in sight of other people, or that the mere presence of city lights, even if there's no one around, can drive the evil away. Nonetheless, when we pulled into 30th Street Station, there was no strange figure in a trench coat. I watched a few people get off the train car ahead of me. A tall woman in a pink coat, a hipster guy wearing a knitted cap, a nerdy-looking businessman. Then the train pulled forward, and we plunged into the darkness. Feeling better about the whole thing, I shot off another text to Aaron, just past Philadelphia. He wasn't there. Oh, good. I was starting to get worried. Call me when you're safe in your apartment, okay? Will do. I love you. I took the jacket off my lap, rolled it into a makeshift pillow, and leaned against the window. The darkness whipped past, and soon I was dozing off again. Now arriving in Cornwall Heights, Pennsylvania. I blearily opened my eyes. The station was small. A little shack attached to the platform. As the only lit structure, it seemed to float in the darkness, disconnected from the rest of the world. And standing there, alone on the platform, was the man in the trench coat. I jerked back. No, 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 I whispered. It can't be. He faced the train. Now, but his head was cut off by the height of the window. I could only see his black shoes. The buttons rising up his coat. Who the hell are you? Why are you following this train? I sat there, frozen with fear, my mind racing. The doors hissed open. This time, he moved. My heart plummeted as he slowly turned towards the front of the train, face still hidden. Then he took a step, a slow, deliberate step towards the back of the car. Then another, and another. Muggy heat crept in from the doors. Sweat ran down my neck. Move, I thought desperately. To the train. Please move. Please. Clank. The door shut. The train groaned into motion. Relief flooded me. It's okay. It's okay, I repeated in my head, trying to steady my pounding heart. The train swayed as it picked up speed, racing through the darkness. I'm okay. I'm... Click. A small sound, coming from behind me. I whipped around. No. He was inside. He stood in the vestibule at the back of the car, facing away from me, trench coat hanging loosely from his shoulders. I jumped out of my seat, backed along the aisle. No, no, no. I turned and ran for the next car, pounded the open button. The doors whooshed open. I ran inside, glancing behind me. He was halfway down the aisle now, back still towards me. I bolted, the door still open, into the next train car. Help! I shouted, but this car was empty too, just like the last. Can anyone hear me? Help! The lights flickered, then went out. Static crackled over the speakers. Help! Whoosh. The vestibule doors opened. He faced me now. His face was hidden in the shadows of his hat, but I could make out a long nose, a twisted mouth, grotesque proportions that didn't seem quite human. He took slow, heavy steps towards me. Then he stopped. What do you want? I screamed. His head canted to the side. Why are you following me? Silence. Silence stretched out between us. It felt like only minutes, but it must have been longer, because the train was soon groaning to a stop. Now arriving in Trenton, New Jersey. Doors hissed open. I ran out onto the platform, shaking, crying. When I got down to the parking lot, I glanced back. The lights were back on in the train, and in the window, I saw his figure standing in the aisle. Then the train pulled away, and there was only silence. I didn't hear about the crash until the next day. The train derailed between Newark Penn Station and New York. A mangled mess of fire, metal, wire, twisted and fused to the rails. The train was empty, however. The only casualty was the conductor. And no man in a trench coat was ever found. Tragedy has a way of turning our brains into something we don't recognize. The unexpected happens so suddenly, it often takes us a little bit of time to adjust or to accept what happened. We never expect it to happen to us, always somebody else, someone on the news, a statistic, a stranger. Trauma changes you thoroughly. Trauma nests in the cells and changes you from the inside out. It buries into the deepest part of your brain. Your personality changes. Your relationships change. Sometimes even your body morphs into someone you don't know. You gain weight. You lose weight. Your eyes sink in. your complexion becomes shallow. Before it happened, I was stupid. I don't really remember who I was, but I know that I was naive, unafraid, and so sure of myself. Even though I had a lot of learning and a lot of growing to do, then I guess most people go around every day not knowing what's really out there, what's happening to people, or how to stop it if it does. The worst part is that when I tell people, they don't believe me. They think I'm dramatic, think I'm making up stories to feel special. I don't understand how people who knew me before, and people who knew me after, and people who can tell the difference can write me off so easily. I guess we should start at the beginning. I live in northwest Arkansas in a tiny place called Eureka Springs. It's a tiny tourist trap. It's generally known for being haunted. I always thought the worst thing really haunting Eureka was a bunch of dust motes and dusty tourists. In a sense, I think I'm still right about that. Ghosts are not what linger in these creaky old houses. I've never been really religious or superstitious. In fact, I still don't know if or what I believe. I have no explanations, but I think that the gates of hell are in Eureka Springs. About 4 months ago, I was out walking along a trail. There are several throughout the town, and a lot of people hike here. I was up pretty deep in the woods, and it seemed like a beautiful day. I mean, absolutely perfect. It wasn't too hot. There was a nice breeze. I had a lot of fun spotting small little critters like birds, squirrels, and rabbits. I was just walking along this trail. As far as I could tell, totally alone when, for seemingly no reason, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Not only that, but all the sounds seemed to disappear. No birds, no squirrel chattering, no leaves in the breeze, nothing. I started to look around thinking that maybe there was another hiker or something. I didn't see anyone. Instead, what I did see, about 15 yards off the trail, was an upright, seemingly untouched wooden door. Now, seeing this door made my stomach drop. How was it standing? Every instinct told me to turn around the way I came, go home, never come back. But the thing about Eureka Springs, to anybody who's ever been there, they know it's an artsy sort of town. It's full of people who paint and sculpt, do these things well, and make a living out of it. I know it sounds stupid, but our brains don't immediately accept strange or unusual things. We are driven to find answers, so I investigated. To anyone who's ever been in a dangerous situation, you know what it's like to feel your instincts screaming against you. For the record, if you do ever feel a gut feeling that says, hey, this isn't right, get away, listen to it. It's there for a reason. I didn't listen. I walked right up to this door. I looked behind it. I looked above it. For the life of me, I could not tell what was holding the door upright. Eventually, I decided there was only one thing left to do. I opened it. Whenever I opened it, there was nothing immediately different about the inside. I saw what I had seen the rest of my walk. Daylight, trees, twigs, leaves. I stepped through it, and then I made the worst mistake of my life. I turned around and shut the door. Immediately, the door disappeared. The trail disappeared. I was still in the woods, but I don't know where. Even now, I don't know where I was. After spinning around looking for my surroundings for a sign of where I was, I saw a figure among the trees. Relieved, I thought she could help me get my bearings. She looked like an older person with gray hair. She was partially obscured by the shade of some sort of thick conifer and facing away from me, standing so still. I didn't know until I got closer that I knew this woman. She had raised me, and even from behind I knew her. She was my grandmother. My grandmother died in 2005. I stared. She stayed put. Grandma? Slowly, her head tilted like she was hearing something faint and far away. Grandma? What's going on? Am I... She turned around. My grandmother's face was almost the same as how I remembered. Almost. Except her eyes were missing. They weren't hollow or sunken in. Where they should have been, there was nothing but some impressions set in smooth, plain skin. And her mouth was just hanging wide open with nothing inside but the deepest black. It was almost like something was wearing her skin. And the smell, oh God, it was horrible. It was putrid. It was like pounds of flesh that had been rotting in the sun. The thing that was impersonating my grandmother seemed to stare at me, even with its lack of eyes. And what could I do but stare back? Like a deer in headlights, I was frozen in a kind of solid fear that's hard to explain. It's like your brain stops working. Panic. This is not a situation humans are built for. Fear does a weird thing to your body. You don't feel fear in your head, but you feel it in your chest. You feel it like ants up and down your legs. Your stomach turns into an iron weight. I pissed myself then and there. You would too. She spoke. I don't know how, seeing as she didn't seem to have a tongue. The voice is something I can't accurately describe to you. It was like if something who had never been on Earth before was doing their best impression of a human. It was many voices. It was deep, but it was high-pitched as well. Sarah, it said, would you enjoy the taste of a life with no pain? I said nothing. I think it might have laughed at me. I passed out. I know it seems anticlimactic, but whatever this thing was, I guess it wasn't interested in taking my life. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. I'd been missing for 2 of them when search and rescue found me. I was severely dehydrated and missing my left pinky finger, but alive. Always tell someone when you're hiking and where, because while I was lucky enough to be found, thanks to the mercy of whatever it is out there, 6 other people are still missing from this area. Or better yet, just don't go walking alone in the woods. The club, I thought, was just another unremarkable, if weird place that I would forget about the next day. It seemed so familiar and the people seemed so typical. The ecstasy ran its course, took hold, and eventually, the sun would come up and the people would come down. When I first saw it, there wasn't one iota of me that thought that this particular building, location really, would become the central focus of my life for the better part of a week. It all happened in the summer of 2005 in a fairly small town of about 25,000 people somewhere in New England. I haven't talked about it since then because I'm the only person who remembers it. The only one who was chosen by this piece of land to tell its story. Here's how it started. Me and 2 friends were out driving around on an unusually warm night. We spotted the club and decided to go in, have a few drinks, enjoy the music. We walked in and were immediately greeted by blaring music so loud, the servers could barely hear our orders. I also took notice of a DJ, tall, at least 6'4" with a tattoo on his hand that looked like a scorpion, and another on his knuckles that read, Trap. My friends and I mocked the club for being too cliche, and as techno music played and glow sticks swirled sickeningly, I started to feel nauseous, and my head began to pound. The DJ shouted, "This next one's straight from the heart," and began spinning the discs like a madman. I ran to the bathroom to puke, pushing my way through a horde of young people my age. Once in the bathroom, I flung the stall door open and projectile vomited into the toilet 2 or 3 times. And when I went to clean myself up and splash some water on my face, I noticed that someone had written, "I want to leave so bad," in what looked like blood. This didn't totally freak me out. It wasn't the weirdest thing I've seen at a rave, or even in a bathroom for that matter, so I mostly dismissed it as the drug-fueled confusion of an angsty teen. Back out in the main room of the club, I told my friends I thought we should go, that I wasn't feeling well, and that the club had a creepy vibe. They wanted to stay though, and so I told them I would meet them outside. I walked out back behind the club, pulled out a cigarette out of the pack, and began to smoke it, slowly, when I suddenly noticed a large shadow lurching towards me, limping. "Who's there?" I asked, not too concerned, but I got no answer. I asked again, but then the shadow hobbled away, and assumed it was some kid on drugs having a bad trip, until I heard it retching around the corner, making noises that sounded completely inhuman. It thrashed around, knocking into the trash cans, and slamming into a car that was parked on the side of the building. This freaked me out, and I ran around to the other side of the building so as to avoid it, and back inside the club. Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics was pounding over the stereo at that point. As the DJ was nowhere to be seen, I was totally out of breath and scared completely shitless. I finally found my friends, sitting at the bar, totally hammered, and they asked me if McDonald's was still open. I finally convinced them to leave, but before we could, a woman with dark red hair stopped us at the door and said, "Thank you for coming. Please come again," before stamping our hands with a barcode. I found it weird, but just wanted to get out of there and not think about the place again. In the car, my friends were way too drunk to talk to them about the things I experienced at the club, so I just kept it to myself, convinced myself that it was nothing to worry about, and just drove us home, back to our respective houses. For some reason the next day, I had to see the club again. I had to see it in broad daylight. I also had to face it alone, without my friends. There was a sort of peace of mind that I needed, closure even, just to see that the club was what I thought it was. Totally and completely unremarkable, harmless, just another place and nothing more. I had forced myself to believe that if I saw it in the most harmless state during the day, that I would be able to forget about it. The sound the shadow made as it retched and gagged kept reverberating in my head, and my nausea would return whenever I thought about it, which was almost constantly, even in my dreams that early morning when I finally got home and collapsed into bed. The location of the building was very inconspicuous, and I had a bit of trouble finding it again. It sat near railroad tracks, the same tracks I'd grown up hearing the trains roar down every night. Eventually, I remembered how we found the club the first time, and I followed the tracks down a dirt road and onto gravel until finally, I could see the neon glow of the building. However, when I reached the exact spot the club was at last night, I instead found myself outside of a grocery store. The store was an exact replica from the outside as my local store that I had been going to since I was a small child. "You'll never want to leave," a sign said, in bold green lettering, glowing so bright I couldn't look at it for too long. I got out of my car and considered all of the possibilities. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I was on an acid trip and I never even left the club, but there was no logical explanation. The grocery store was supposed to be at least 7 miles in the opposite direction, nowhere near train tracks. I leaned up against my car and stared at the store for what seemed like forever. I briefly considered calling one of my friends from the night before, but it seemed useless. They were too drunk to know where they were last night. I decided to just walk in. When I entered, it was deja vu. The store was the same on the inside as my local grocery store, and the shoppers there didn't seem to notice. Maybe they just didn't know. I walked around aimlessly for a bit, completely dumbfounded as to what was going on in my town. I decided to buy something. A pack of gum, $1. And before I checked out, I went to the bathroom to make sure nobody had written any ominous messages on the mirror. But unlike the club, the store's bathroom was completely clean. Not a blemish, no blood. When I got to the checkout counter, I vaguely recognized the cashier. I paid for the gum and asked him how long the store had been at this location. "I don't know, a while I guess," was all he said. His eyes were dark and gloomy, and I couldn't see any emotion in them. I was about to walk away when I noticed his tattoos, a scorpion on his hand and the word trap on his knuckles. I stopped, looked around as if I were expecting someone or something to jump out and attack me. The lights above our heads hummed. Music faintly played over the radio. "Didn't I see you in a club last night?" I asked. "Weren't you the DJ?" "Yeah, I do that too," he said with a laugh that made me uncomfortable. He just kept staring at me with an emotionless smile. "Have a good day." My voice trailed off. "Yeah, bro, but it's nighttime," he said. I ran out of the store, and sure enough, it was nighttime, black as a crow. I moved to my car, threw the pack of gum on the passenger seat, and looked back at the store. The neon light emanating from it was now unbearable, and the bright green sign that once read, "You'll never want to leave," had been changed to, "I want to leave so bad." At this point, I was completely sure that I'd either lost my mind entirely or that something terrifying was happening. I remember researching for hours on the internet all the different possibilities. String theory, mental illness, the effects drugs can have on the human psyche, shapeshifters, and skinwalkers. Everything. Nothing made sense. There was no one theory that fit a narrative. Nothing I researched or had ever heard about up until this time was the piece of this cosmic puzzle that I was looking for. This is the part where I have a hard time discerning reality from fantasy. The fucked up places my mind took me while I slept. What I do remember is at around 2 a.m. the next night. I had drank enough to gain the courage to drive back to the building. By this time, I knew where it was located by heart. The train tracks looked more ominous to me now. My stomach dropped when I saw them, and I wanted to turn back and forget about all of this, but something propelled me forward, and I continued to follow the tracks, drunk, driving too fast, more scared of a building than getting pulled over. At least I knew jail was real. The radio was blaring, and I could feel the bass from the back of my car pounding against my seat as the full moon briefly blinded me, and then hid behind the trees just as I pulled up to the exact location of what was a grocery store the last time I saw it. What stood now was a beautiful house. Large glass windows, made for natural lighting, allowed me to see a packed party full of people dancing and screaming and doing drugs, and I swear I heard someone shout, "He's here," but I could have just been imagining it. I again stepped out of my car and leaned against it. I stared at the house party waiting for someone to greet me, or at least acknowledge me. I pulled a couple of shooters of whiskey from my pocket and downed them quickly before marching forward with a false sense of confidence that the voice in the back of my head told me I would regret. I tried to open the door, but it was locked, so I pounded on it and screamed for somebody to let me in, but I only saw shadows float by in the windows. I decided to walk around the back and see if I could get in that way, and then I heard that fucking sound again. It stopped me dead in my tracks and sobered me immediately. I retched, choked, gagged, screamed, puked, coughed, barked, howled, and struggled to swallow something. It sounded panicked, like it was dying. I turned around and saw its eyes, yellow like the moon and bright as a bonfire. It looked at me with fear and confusion as it began pulling the thing it was trying to swallow whole back from out of its throat. It stood tall, too tall for a normal man, about 8 feet. Its knees were all bent backwards, and its face was sickeningly malformed. Its flesh was rotting, and its smell turned my stomach. Its mouth gaped like a black hole. Its arms were twice as long as its legs. I realized then that the thing I was locking eyes with was the same thing I heard, and that's shadow I saw 2 nights prior at the club. It continued to regurgitate what it had swallowed in a morbid, vile manner. It was a girl, my age, that it had swallowed. After it spit her back out, it grunted, puked, and fled into the bushes a few feet from where it stood. I asked the girl if she was okay, but she only laughed, and her eyes were the same grotesque yellow as the thing that ate her and then hacked her back up in the yard. Her laughter freaked me out, and I was about to leave the slider door open. A man in a Jason Voorhees mask had flung it open, and then pulled me into the party where a song had just started playing, and everyone was wearing shirts that said, "I want to leave so bad." But they were all smiling, and the music was distorted, and I regretted ever showing up. And then I saw the DJ again, same tattoos as before. "We have a guest," he shouted through a microphone over the already oppressively loud music. Everyone turned to me, still smiling. I tried to turn back and leave through the slider door I was pulled in through, but when I turned, the thing was standing right outside of it, banging on it, yellow eyes peering right at me, crying, begging to be let in. I turned back around and pushed my way through the sea of young people partying. I recognized some of their faces. Some of them I went to school with. "Relax," someone shouted at me. "Let him leave," the DJ screamed. "He'll be back." I finally reached the front door. I opened it and immediately heard the sound of the thing still pounding on the slider door from the backyard. Its cries spurred me on as I ran to my car and drove away. So, if I have to be honest, I wish I didn't. I spent the next 3 days drinking and getting high and trying to forget about the location. I had pretty much accepted that something completely out of my control was going on, and I didn't think going back was worth the risk. I fell asleep one night, high on anti-anxiety medication, and not entirely sure that the feeling of euphoria the drugs were giving me wasn't just another false hope in that chaotic time. I remember waking up and falling back asleep, rhythmically, every now and then. I would wake and drift back off to dreamland. At some point though, I woke up to the feeling of motion. I was moving, and I wasn't entirely sure why, but I figured it was the Xanax making me feel that way. I didn't think anything of it until I heard the sound of a train whistle and the roar of the wheels against the tracks. I jumped out of what I thought was my bed, but what was by now just a cabin in a train. I fell to the floor and shouted, "Where the hell am I?" The train halted, and I looked out of the window. I was pretty sure that the train had stopped at the location. The club, the grocery store, the house party, all were gone. What stood now was absolutely nothing but a graveyard. Thousands of headstones and memorials stretched across the land. I ran the length of the train and forced the door open and stepped out. I cautiously entered the graveyard, certain that at any moment the dead would shoot up from the ground and drag me under with them. What actually happened shook me to my core. The first thing I noticed was a shadow. Its shadow, off in the distance, 50 to 60 yards off. It was, as usual, grunting, and it briefly looked at me and I saw its disgusting yellow eyes again, even from so far away. And I realized it was eating something, and I assumed it was a person. "What do you want from me?" I called out. Being eaten by the thing didn't seem so bad anymore. "Why are you torturing me?" I walked forward, ready to possibly confront the thing, and maybe the DJ if he was there as well, which I assumed he was. Before I could reach the beast, I was stopped in my tracks by a voice from behind. "Just make sure they know." The voice said. "Know what?" I asked as I rolled around. The DJ was standing there, face all distorted and tattooed now. "What do you want me to tell who?" I demanded, and a tear streamed down my now shallow and sunken cheeks. "There is nothing to fear. You were never happy. Nobody is." The DJ said as he sat on one of the tombstones, "Whatever happens to you and yours, it was always going to happen. That thing back there, eating people, it's not so bad. People eat people all the time." The DJ looked down and opened his jacket, revealing his ribs and organs. "I don't understand," was all I could mutter. "Doesn't matter. You aren't good enough. Nobody is. Your fate, like everyone else's, will be the same as mine," he said, and gestured at his rotting, distorted body. I looked back at the thing and it was gone, and when I looked back at the DJ, he was gone too, and I slowly walked over to where the thing had been eating whatever, or whoever it was eating was now gone as well, and I felt like the whole situation was gone. I looked over now at where the train had pulled up, and only saw the railroad tracks, and by the tracks on the road I saw my car parked, door open, lights on. I started towards my car, and as I walked I finally noticed what the tombstones all read. I want to leave so bad. I got in my car, followed the tracks back down to my house, and not long after I graduated college with a degree in archaeology. I think about these events every day of my life and the effects they had on me. I feel now is the time to write this story as an exorcism of sorts. All I have to say about the situation is what I saw. I can only relay the facts. The interpretation is up to you. "Need a lift, buddy?" the man said after rolling down his window. "No thanks, man," I replied. "About to rain though, and you're here in the middle of nowhere," he said in his southern drawl. I wanted to disagree with him, but I could already hear the thunder rumbling in the distant night. "I suppose you could save me the rest of this 4-mile walk," I stammered. "Well, hop on in, brother man," he continued as I opened the door. "Name's Pete." "Hey sir, I'm Justin," I replied as I was hit with the musty smell of what moldy bread masked by what mothballs smells like. Nice, I thought to myself, as if I hadn't made any other poor decisions today. Truth is, I just ran out on my ex-girlfriend of 3 years. One can only take so much verbal yelling until you just break. "Where are you heading this late, stranger?" the man asked. I blinked around because I had almost fallen asleep. I'd been driving for 12 hours from Florida, heading back to Mom's house in Missouri when I had a flat tire. I finally stammered out. I'm headed in town for the night. My car got a flat tire, and I just need to find a hotel room or something until morning." The man chuckled. "Ain't no hotel rooms in that town, or about an hour away," he continued. "Tell you what, I got a spare bedroom in the basement. You can have your privacy, and I can run you down the tire store in the morning." Perhaps a lapse of judgment. "Okay," was all I managed to get out. We pulled into his drive. and it resembled nothing of the image in my head due to his old car and musty smell. The house was amazing. It was easily 3,000 square feet and 2 stories high. Perhaps I misjudged this fellow. I've heard of rich people all the time riding around in junk cars. Maybe that's how they have all their money, I thought to myself. He parked the car in front of the detached garage, and we got out and headed for the front door. Once inside, I got a weird feeling. The walls were bare. There was hardly any furniture sitting around except for a couch and dining table. I was too tired to question it. "You live in this huge house all alone, sir?" I asked. "Mm-hmm," his only reply. Perhaps a divorce or something, so I just left it alone. "You can sleep just down here in the basement room so you got your privacy and all," he exclaimed. I nodded. "Thanks very much for your help, sir," I said as I followed him down the steps. "Mm-hmm," again his only reply. He pulled open the door to the room and waved me inside. I stepped past the man and into the room. A single cot, a cabinet of some sort, and was that chains on the wall? The door slammed behind me and a sudden, unexplainable fear set in. I turned quickly to grab the handle to the door, but it was locked tightly and solid oak. I tried banging on the door, prying it with my shoulder, but all this to no avail. No answers came from the other side of the door. I decided to survey the surroundings a bit, but suddenly a sound from outside the room, and all the lights went out. It was pitch black. I could barely see my hands in front of my face. I felt a panic attack oncoming. I grabbed my chest and sat down on the cot. What had I got myself into? I thought. Surely I was wrong or misunderstanding something. I laid back after an hour sitting on the bed sobbing to myself in fear. I managed to doze off to sleep eventually, awake and still in a pitch black room. I banged on the door again screaming, "Sir, I think I'm ready to head into town." I had no idea what time it was, no idea how long I'd slept, and no idea what was going on. The fear that I've never felt overwhelmed me with not knowing. I sat back on the bed, laid back sometimes, shifted around, and everything. I laid there for hours with the most dreadful thoughts overcoming me. I was starving. I had probably been down there for over a day now, yelling, screaming, trying to find comfort in the darkness. I'm going to die here, I thought. I banged on the door. I tried to pry it open. I tried everything to feel around the room for escape. I sat back down on the bed, giving up hope, when suddenly the lights came on. It was blindingly bright from being in darkness for so long. A small latch opened at the bottom of the door, and in slid a sandwich on a paper plate. I stared at it for a moment thinking it was probably poison, and he was trying to kill me. But I could also hear my stomach growling. I picked up the plate and took the top off. It was literally one piece of cheese between 2 slices of bread. I inspected every inch of it before taking a bite. It was the best thing I'd ever eaten. Despite the bread being a little stale and cheese being warm, I was just starving though. I glanced around the room while the lights were on. I saw a stack of used paper plates in one corner. I saw a few red smeared stains on the wall. Blood. Clearly I wasn't the first person that had been down here. I quickly took note of everything in the room. A single cabinet in the top, the cot I was on, and what looked like a chair with shackles or straps on it. I stood up to see more about it, but the lights went off again. I sat back down and pondered. I laid back and accepted my fate, I guess. This was going to be my life. There was no more screaming to be done, no more trying to escape, no more motivation. I laid around for a few more hours when I could barely hear a commotion upstairs. Gunshots? Oh, great. The gunshots continued for a minute or so until they stopped. I felt the need to hide, but where would I go? I was scared again. Just great, I thought. That's when I heard it. "Help," a female voice shouted. Confused, I tried to yell back, "Hey, who's there? Help me." That's when multiple voices began to yell out. "Help," they screamed. What was going on? I had no idea. When I began to hear loud banging of wood, almost like banging on doors, I sat there in fear as the banging made its way to my door. It nudged open. It was a police officer SWAT member. I ran to the door as the SWAT member moved on. I glanced outside the door and down the hallway. Looking both ways, I noticed multiple doors and the SWAT member knocking them all open. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one down here. People began to walk out of these doors, some looking like they had been down there for months or years. Some had tremendous scars on them. Some people had dried blood around their noses and faces. Apparently, the gentleman I had met on the road was holding us all hostage and torturing us for his pleasure. I had only been down there for 2 days when the SWAT team rescued us. Perhaps I was one of the lucky ones. Another member of the SWAT team led a couple of us outside at a time. I walked past the living room area, where a couple of SWAT members were standing to block the entrance to it. I glanced past and saw broken glass from a window, and a body lying on the floor with some blood. Getting just a bare glance of it, I could tell that it was the body of Pete. I was still scared and shaken up, but some of these people were pale white with fear, and clearly mentally distraught. Again, lucky. Perhaps. I thank heavens for those SWAT members, and that I only had to be down there for 2 nights. I can't believe we made it. Flashback to about a week ago. It all started with a vacation. Me and my fiance had been stuck in this rut. Work, bills, home, sleep, wake up, work. This repetitive cycle has been so draining, so hollow. As I made it from another day of mindless chores that benefit the workplace more than my own elevation of life, another day of being in a place that could forget that my existence was even a piece of this reality, she asked me, "Where are we going?" In confusion, I smiled and said, "We're going on a trip next week. Request off work. It's time for us to live." With a perplexed look on her face, she says, "A trip?" An uncertain giggle under her words. "Yes, love, a trip, a vacation," I said with the warmest smile I could conjure up at that moment. As I stared in her tired eyes, I told her, "You see, through the years, we've seemed to lose sight of what's important, what living is all about. We survive, yeah, but are we truly living?" Curiosity washes over her face, that same face that I have grown to know over all these years. The face of love, the face of acceptance, the face that told so many stories. Stories spoken just by a stare, because her true stories would never break free from the locks that she held tight over her lips. 2 knocks for good luck. I laughed. I've heard this saying so many times before. I never really knew what it meant. Saying she grew up hearing, I'm sure. Something carved into her memory, programmed into her being. But with that being said, I would reply with, "And 3 knocks to seal the deal." And with that, we were off to planning a getaway. We chose to go to a place where I grew up, something cheap yet exciting, exhilarating for us both. I was born in a small town, a town that you would look over if it wasn't for that one rusted sign telling you that the next rest stop is a Piggly Wiggly in the next 3 exits off on the interstate. Even then, to get to that one grocery store from where our destination would be, it would still be a 30-minute drive out. Focus. Cabin. Long story short, this cabin that I'm referring to was left behind by a dear uncle of mine, a great getaway spot surrounded by trees. Just 3 miles off a dirt road when you travel through my once vibrant small town. In the 20 years that I've been gone, the warm town that once blanketed me with comfort has become an empty coffin full of past lives. Lives stuck in a time that has long since passed by. Me and my fiance finally arrive, after fighting over whose solo was better during a radio sing-off and many trips to the bathroom. Yes, behind the trees are considered a bathroom when there is no buildings for miles. With the sun long past by in the rear view, we get out of the car, get a much needed stretching, and listen to the song of dead leaves play under our footsteps, and the sounds of insects that have no name that I can remember, as we make it to the cabin door. The old cabin has held up, but time holds no punches. The wooden stairs moan from the pressure of being awaked from decades of hibernation. The only source of light being powered by a flashlight from a device that has long lost signal miles ago. I go to unlock the door, searching for a key that has not been used for so many years. Strange. Dust on the door, but none on the door handle, I said to myself. Ignoring the simple fact, we finally get in. Vacation at last. "I can't believe we made it," she exclaimed, with a look that has been absent from her face for a long time. Joy. The furniture, check. Electricity? Check. Cooking supplies? Check. All left just as it was years ago. Only thing to do is take the plastic off of these damn couches. The cabin might be old, but still had the essential needs for a nice vacation spot. As I grabbed the last piece of plastic blocking my way of full relaxation, I look up and stare at my future wife. Her long dark hair brushed her shoulders in a way that took my mind back to less stressful times. But something felt off. Hey sweetheart, I'm almost finished with this foolishness so we can sit and get us some well-deserved rest. I said to her as she faced away from me, gazing out the window. No response. I tilted my head in confusion. She loves to play games, I jokingly told myself. But deep inside I knew something was troubling her. When she finally broke the silence, I jumped, startled by the abrupt sound of breaking silence. Did you hear that? She mumbled. Hear what, love? Are you okay? I asked without even knowing the fear that was building in my own voice. If this was a joke, she definitely had me going. Silence for another moment. Then, something is here with us. Did my dad say he would be here? She said in a low tone, sounding almost nothing like the woman I knew at all. A voice from a stranger. No, a voice from an acquaintance that I haven't heard from in years. Your dad, sweetheart? You know that we haven't seen him in years, let alone talk to him. Why would you think your dad would be out here of all people? Anxiety now gripping my lungs, taking half of every breath that I tried to make. I'm going to help him with his bags. These words clawed at the pit of my soul. The fear had now manifested into a reality. A noise outside shook me out of my trance. The dust on the door, but not the door handle. That thought hit me like a gust of wind from a hurricane. I reached out for the woman that I have known so well. I tried to tell her that her dad has been gone for many years now. I tried to comfort her and tell her that we just need to relax, that the days, the months have tarnished our minds. I tried, but when I took her hand, when she turned around, all I could see was an empty shell of who I used to love. With a cold stare, she looked at me. I just need to help him with his bags, she said, as I felt a cold burn penetrating my stomach. I looked down to see the hand that I once held so many times before, now holding the handle of a tool that had opened me up to the outside world. As she removed the knife from my stomach, she screamed an inhuman scream and ran out of the door. I tried to call for her. I tried to tell her that we would get through this, as I had told her so many times before. But my words just fell at my feet, just as the crimson river from a wound that would never heal. Lights began to fade. Outside the cabin door, I could hear laughter and crying, as if there really were two people out there. As I sit on the floor, gasping and clenching to what I once called life, I willed myself to move. Just once more. Just one thing I needed to make sure of. The warm blood leaving my body, like summer switching to autumn, saturated my shirt, the floor, my vision. I knew though that there was one thing that would put me at peace. The one thing that I could hear that would break this illusion casted by the mirrors of torment. I dragged myself closer to the door, locked it. The mixture of splinters and blood was no match for the pain that I was trying my best to avoid. My last hope. As I pulled myself to the cabin door, resting my back against it, after hearing the sobs and misery of the one thing that held me, that anchored me to this world, I stopped. I took a deep breath, with tears streaming from my face, tears that already knew what my mind refused to believe. I spoke. 2 knocks for good luck. Words spoken to the blood-soaked floor. No response. Baby, 2 knocks for good luck. I cried out before I could feel my consciousness start to slip from this plane of existence. Before I lost sight of all that I was holding on to, before the blood turned the wood on the cabin floor into red velvet, before I closed my eyes, knowing that they would most likely never open again, I heard her voice. Through a sinister laugh, through the lock that had been placed over her lips for many years, she replied, 3 knocks seal the deal. We moved about a year ago, but everything has changed from then. We used to live in a city, and now we are in a woodlands area. At the moment we live in a trailer, in a barn, but the first week into living here, I started hearing strange noises in dark areas. We have horses, so we also have a tack room. I was coming out of the tack room one night and heard a low growl as if a dog was behind me. But when I turned one of the lights on, nothing was there. And the strange thing is, we don't even have a dog. So I flipped out and ran inside, not knowing what the hell I just witnessed. For a while it all stopped, but when we had been watching a movie, we also had the door open so we could see outside. We have some peacock feathers in a vase outside as well. And when my mom pointed out that they were moving, I had thought she was joking. And when I looked outside, she was right. She kept bothering me about it until I finally looked at it again and saw it moving. I had said it was just the wind, but she said there was none. At one point I went outside and had thought that just maybe some rats had babies in there, but I checked and I was wrong. But just like most people, I don't believe in paranormal things, so I wanted to make some kind of excuse about the moving feather, but I couldn't. Soon stuff started disappearing out of nowhere, and when I asked my mom about the stuff, she said she didn't take it, so of course I was weirded out. A few days later, my mom told me to get something out of the second floor of the barn, which was our storage unit. So I went to the back and found the items I was there for, but I had also found a box with all my stuff in it. I had gone back to my mom and blamed her, saying that she did take my stuff. Anyway, things were fine again, so I just ignored the normal, strange stuff. But then I thought, hey, why don't I stay up on the second floor for a night? So that's what I did that same night. It was going fine up until around midnight. There was another low growl from before. In the corner I had found the box in. I was about to go check it out, but that idea flew out the window when I saw a pair of blood-red eyes looking straight at me. I was stuck there in shock and fear, with a load of adrenaline running through me. Finally getting my shit back together, I snapped back and took off down the stairs. Looking behind me, I saw a dog-type creature drenched in blood. It looked like a dog at first, but when the light hit it, that thing looked like a human with elongated limbs and fur going down from its head to its back. I was freaking out. I had slipped 2/3 of the way down and fell down hard on my head. The next day I woke up in the hospital. I was wondering where I was, and my mom leapt out of a chair she was sitting in. She hugged me with joy, asking if I was okay. I just said I felt fine. I went home a day later and told my mom that we should move again. She of course asked why, but I just begged her to let us move. Eventually she agreed, and we moved a few months later. When we had moved to the new house, I was happy, but a few years living there, I'd wondered if anybody has moved to the hell we were at before, and if they survived. But all questions were answered when I looked out of my bedroom window and saw a pair of blood-red eyes. I've been seeing spirits and ghosts ever since I could remember. My first experience was when I was 3 years old and my sister was 4. My family rented the upper floor of a house in the city. There was a kitchen, family room, bathroom, and one bedroom. My sister and I slept on a pull-out sofa in the family room. We would sleep with our heads on opposite sides of the sofa, basically feet to feet. Every night, my mom would tuck us in and shut the lights and door. This is when things would get scary. Figures that looked like chalk drawings would come through one wall and pass through the other. It almost seemed like people were carrying on about their day-to-day business. Looking back, I now believe it was most likely some kind of a portal. Most of these figures would just walk by like we were not even there. There were 2 I remember clearly that would stop, look our way, and then just continue on. The gentleman wore a suit with a fedora on his head, and he also carried a briefcase. He would put his briefcase down, look at us, and slightly bow, then pick up his briefcase and walk away. Then there was the lady. She had Marilyn Monroe hair, pencil skirt with a sleeveless button-down shirt. She would stop, look at us, smile, and walk away. As children, me and my sister never talked about the ghosts. Years later when we were teenagers, we were talking about the different places we lived at. This is when we realized that we both saw these ghosts. We both described the lady and gentleman ghost to a T. I have a lot more stories that have happened over the years. Part 2. I posted a story not too long ago about ghosts and spirits that were like chalk drawings. I wanted to share a terrifying experience that happened, which involved a lady ghost. One night as usual, my mother tucked us in. She shut the lights off and shut the door. Just like every night, the chalk people began to walk from one wall and out the other. Then the gentleman with the fedora stopped, put his briefcase down, did a bow and walked away. Next came the lady. She stopped, looked at us and smiled. This night was different. Instead of moving on, the lady approached me. I was terrified. She leaned over and said, "Would you like some tea?" I nodded because I was too afraid to say anything. She walked through the door and she went into the kitchen. I knew this because I could hear her putting water on to boil. I could hear her walking around. I clearly remember the clinking of the spoon as she stirred the sugar in the cup. She eventually came back holding the cup of tea. She leaned over as if to hand me the cup, when all of a sudden, she transformed into this hideous creature with laser-sharp teeth that filled its mouth. I let out a horrific scream. My sister jumped from where she was sleeping, and she hugged me tight. We stayed that way till my mom came in.